All right, let's jump into a story of urban transformation. We're talking the redevelopment of a huge 88-acre area in East Baltimore.
Right next to the Johns Hopkins Medical Campus.
Exactly. And it's a massive project. We're talking 20 years, $1.8 billion.
A lot of moving pieces, that's for sure.
We've got articles, quotes, the whole 9 yards, and we're going deep, like deep dive deep, into what happens when you have a powerhouse like Johns Hopkins.
Taking on a struggling neighborhood.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
What's interesting is it wasn't just Johns Hopkins. You also had the city, the state, even the Annie E. Casey Foundation.
Wow, so it's like a massive team effort.
It was a public-private partnership on a scale that you rarely see.
So for those of you who haven't been following every detail of this project, it's basically a huge revitalization project.
In East Baltimore.
Yes. And to really understand the impact, we need to kind of go back in time a little bit. Imagine a 70% vacancy rate, high crime.
Poverty levels twice the city average.
Yeah, and this was East Baltimore in the year 2000.
Right next door to, a world-renowned medical center.
This world-class institution.
It was a stark contrast. And it presented a really complex challenge. Yeah. How do you revitalize a community while still respecting
The people who already live there.
Right. I mean, this is a question that cities all over the world are grappling with. And East Baltimore.
Offers a fascinating case study.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks here. Whenever we talk about these big projects, we can't shy away from the tough stuff.
No.
And in this case, over 580 families were relocated to make way for this redevelopment.
Yeah, this is where things get really nuanced. Because on the one hand, you have the disruption and the hardship that relocation causes. On the other hand, you have East Baltimore Development, Inc.,
Hey.
the nonprofit formed to oversee the project, trying to soften the blow.
Okay, so EBDI is basically the quarterback for this whole project.
Yeah, they're calling the plays, making sure everyone is working together.
What kind of efforts did they make? Give us the details.
Well, they offered above-market value compensation for the homeowners, rental assistance, and even 5 years of support services.
Wow.
And in the history of Baltimore's urban renewal, that level of support had never been done before.
That's pretty significant when you compare it to other projects.
Right. And we even have a quote from Andy Frank, special advisor to the Johns Hopkins president.
Okay.
And he said, "People's lives were disrupted, their houses taken. I can't begin to know what that is like. Never before in the history of Baltimore City's urban renewal projects have people who have been forcibly relocated through urban renewal received this level of benefits."
That's a powerful statement.
It is.
But it makes you think, is it ever truly possible to replace that sense of community, that sense of belonging that's lost when people are uprooted from their homes?
Yeah, it raises a really fascinating question about the definition of benefits in these situations. I mean, is it even possible to put a price tag on the emotional and social costs of losing your home? Some argue that just focusing on financial compensation ignores those intangible aspects of displacement.
Yeah. It's a complex issue with no easy answers. So, with this ambitious vision in place, how did things actually play out on the ground?
So initially, the project had a ton of momentum. They built the Science Plus Technology Park, the Rango's building, and then the 2008 recession hit.
Oh, man. Talk about timing.
The financial crisis hit this project hard, especially because it relied so much on private investment. Construction loans dried up, developers got nervous. So EBDI had to kind of rethink their strategy and prioritize those projects that would generate more immediate returns, like student housing.
Makes sense. Show investors this is still a viable project, even in a tough economic climate.
Exactly. And so Reed Hall, which was the only housing facility on the medical campus at the time, was scheduled to close.
Okay.
That's when the idea for the 929 apartment building was born.
That's the 20-story residential tower, right?
Yeah.
Right in the heart of the project.
Yes.
I bet it filled up pretty quickly.
It did, mostly with Johns Hopkins graduate students. Chris Shea, the president and CEO of ABDI, called it a way to embed a Johns Hopkins presence in the core of the project.
Yeah.
He felt that by having students living there, it demonstrated Johns Hopkins' investment in its success.
It's almost like they built in a market for all that new retail and all those new amenities that they were planning.
Right.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because it wasn't just about shiny new buildings.
Absolutely not. EBDI knew that physical infrastructure was just one part of the equation. You needed those amenities, those gathering places, those places for people to connect.
Places that would make people actually want to live there, not just work or study there.
Exactly. And that's where the Henderson Hopkins School comes in. It's a brand new K-8 school, built in partnership with the Johns Hopkins School of Education and Morgan State University. And it was designed to serve the local children and attract those new families to the area.
I read it was the first new school built in East Baltimore in over 25 years.
Huge deal.
That's incredible.
David Andrews, the dean of the Johns Hopkins School of Education, called Henderson Hopkins their hospital,
Interesting.
emphasizing its role in training future educators and developing new programs that would benefit the whole city.
Wow, and I heard that he moved to the neighborhood himself to really show his commitment.
He did. Alongside the school, they developed Eager Park, which is this 6-acre green space
Yeah.
meant to be the heart of the community, farmers markets, live music, yoga classes, you name it, playgrounds.
It sounds like they were trying to create this sense of community from the ground up.
Remember, this was an area where people were once afraid to park their cars. Now they're competing for parking spots. It's really a testament to how much things have changed.
It's a pretty dramatic shift. It really does sound like they were focused on creating this safe and vibrant, walkable neighborhood. But we've talked a lot about the big picture. I want to hear about the people who actually live there, their experiences, their stories.
Yeah. And that's exactly where we're headed next. We're going to delve into that human side of this massive redevelopment project. Meet the people who call East Baltimore home. It's fascinating how these individual stories can really bring a large-scale project like this to life.
Yeah, it's the human element.
In East Baltimore, there are so many voices.
Okay, I'm ready for it. Whose stories really stuck with you?
Well, remember Tim Parrish?
Yeah, he was so excited about his new house.
He was thrilled to move into that newly renovated row house
With his kids.
with his kids, and he had a front row seat to all the construction because he owns a trucking company.
That's right.
He was a true believer in the project, even when things weren't moving as fast as everyone hoped.
Yeah, he was very optimistic.
Yeah, his optimism is contagious. And then there's Mondel Powell.
The owner of T-Vol.
Yes, he chose to open a second location in the EBDI area.
That's pretty cool.
He saw the potential of the neighborhood with the increasing foot traffic from students and new residents.
Yeah.
You know, it's inspiring that this Philadelphia native decided to invest in Baltimore's future. It says a lot about the renewed energy that this project has created.
Definitely. But not everyone shares that same level of enthusiasm.
Right. For some longtime residents, the changes have been bittersweet. You
Yeah.
know, it can be tough to see your neighborhood change so dramatically, even if the changes are seen as positive by others.
Yeah, makes sense.
Like Ethel Burris, for example,
Okay.
77-year-old lifelong resident of East Baltimore. She admits to missing the old days,
Yeah.
that sense of community that she remembers from her childhood.
It's kind of a reminder that progress isn't always a straight line, right?
Right.
Sometimes there are losses along the way.
Absolutely. And her perspective is crucial to understanding the full impact. You know, she acknowledged that the area was becoming nicer, especially with the new park and amenities.
Sure.
But for her, there's that sense of nostalgia for what once was.
Did you come across any stories about people who were actually relocated because of the project?
You know, it's a perspective that's often missing from these kinds of narratives. It's easy to focus on the shiny new buildings, the influx of new residents, but we have to remember that for some day, this progress came at a personal cost.
Right. Even with that generous compensation, it's hard to put a price tag on those emotional and social ties people have to their homes and communities.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to hear those voices, to understand the full spectrum of experiences that this project has generated.
So we've heard from a longtime resident, a new homeowner, a business owner. What about the students? They're a big part of this new community, right?
You're right. The student population is a significant factor. We have Eric Dane, a medical student, living in that 929 building. He enjoys the convenience and the vibrancy of the area.
I bet it's a big draw to be close to the medical campus.
Of course.
All those amenities right there.
Yeah, Eric's presence there reflects a larger demographic shift that's happening.
Okay.
More and more young professionals are opting to live in urban environments.
Yeah, it's like a microcosm of a larger trend. You've got longtime residents, students, professionals, families, all coming together in this revitalized space.
It creates a fascinating dynamic. But like any experiment in urban planning, there are bound to be unintended consequences.
That's what we got to explore next.
Exactly. What happens after that initial excitement fades? What are the long-term effects of this kind of large-scale redevelopment? Who ultimately benefits? Is it truly inclusive?
These are some big questions.
Yeah, and those are the questions that we'll be tackling in the final part of our deep dive.
All right, so we've talked about the vision, the challenges, those personal stories that really make this project come alive.
Right.
But now I want to step back and look at the big picture. What's the lasting legacy of this project?
The East Baltimore redevelopment has really become this case study. It's a model that other cities are looking at with a mix of admiration and caution, I think.
Because it wasn't perfect, right?
Of course not. I mean, there have been undeniable successes, lower crime rates, increased property values,
Few jobs.
amenities. But there are still concerns about gentrification.
And displacement of longtime residents.
Displacement, yeah, and that raises those tough questions about fairness and who really benefits from these types of projects.
Yeah. It's like, how do you revitalize a community without pushing out the very people who make it unique?
It's a balancing act
Yeah.
that cities all over are really struggling with.
And how do you make sure that all the new stuff, all the cool amenities, the opportunities, how do you make sure that they're accessible to everyone, not just a select few?
That's the real challenge. And one of the big takeaways from the East Baltimore experience is the importance of community engagement. From the very beginning, EBDI really tried to involve residents in the planning process.
Yeah, I remember reading about that.
To listen to their concerns and incorporate that feedback.
They even hired residents as liaisons to kind of bridge that gap between the developers and the people who are going to be most affected by the project.
Exactly. That kind of transparency and collaboration is crucial. Another takeaway is the importance of mixed income housing. One of EBDI's goals was to create a diverse community, not just a luxury enclave.
Which makes sense if you want to avoid gentrification, right? So how did they achieve that?
Well, they made sure to incorporate a variety of different housing options, everything from those affordable rentals to market rate townhomes. This helps prevent displacement and maintain that social fabric of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
It's about creating a place where people from all walks of life can live together.
So it sounds like a pretty thoughtful approach. But even with the best intentions, it's not always easy to get everything right. What were some of the challenges that they faced?
Well, one of the biggest challenges has been attracting and retaining businesses.
Okay.
While some new businesses have opened, a lot have also closed,
Yeah.
which leaves residents with limited choices for things like shopping and dining.
It seems like that's a problem in a lot of these areas that are being redeveloped. You can build it, but they won't necessarily come.
Exactly. It requires a lot more than just building the infrastructure. It's also about creating a supportive environment for businesses,
Giving them the tools they need to succeed.
addressing things like access to capital, workforce development, marketing support. And it's not even just about businesses. It's about that sense of community ownership, that pride. So creating those spaces for people to come together, connect, celebrate that shared heritage.
Invest in that social infrastructure, not just the physical stuff.
Yeah, because ultimately, the success of any project like this depends on the people who live there.
Right. It's about creating a place where people feel connected, supported, and proud to call it home.
That's it. And that brings us to a final thought-provoking question for our listeners. What does responsible redevelopment look like in your community?
Is there a similar project happening near you? What can we learn from the East Baltimore experience?
Both the good and the bad.
The successes and the challenges. And how can you, as a listener, get involved in shaping the future of your own neighborhood? Because the conversation about urban renewal,
It's not over.
this is an ongoing process that needs constant dialogue. It needs collaboration. And it needs people who are willing to adapt and learn from the past.
Absolutely.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the East Baltimore redevelopment. We hope this has given you a deeper understanding of these complex issues and sparked your curiosity to explore what's happening in your own backyard. So until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep that conversation going.